So everybody watched The Legend of Korra on Netflix, and then everybody decided to make a video essay about it. Including me. Sorry it took so long. I tried to keep an open mind watching T-Loc this time because I feel like the first time I watched it, I had already decided that I didn't like it. And I was actually kind of excited. Welp, turns out I liked it less. I'm going to be tougher in this video than I was in the Steven Universe critique, and that entirely has to do with the shadow that Korra is under. Maybe that seems unfair, but if you're going to continue a piece of fiction, it can't help but be compared to the original. So here are the 4 fundamental reasons that The Legend of Korra doesn't work. Number 1, it lacks cohesion. I'm not saying that it has bad continuity. That's not it. My beef with the show is that it has 4 separate villains with 4 separate storylines that barely tie together. The best thing about Avatar: The Last Airbender is that it doesn't really have traditional season arcs. It didn't feel like 3 separate storylines, but 3 parts of the same storyline, masterly paced and structured. The Legend of Korra's story structure is simply more standard. The first season actually has a pretty solid concept. It makes sense that after the Industrial Revolution that bending would become less relevant, and even the Avatar would become less of a deity figure during the rise of technology. Plus, if I was a non-bender, I would be pretty pissed that benders were using their powers as weapons to get whatever they want. I mean, I know they make fun of protesters for using the word oppress too much for some reason.
Benders like this girl only use their power to oppress us!
But he's kinda right. That literally is a form of oppression. And benders have been using their abilities as a means of oppression and intimidation since, forever. And the one thing that's always really bothered me about Avatar is I don't understand why Aang taking away Ozai's powers would disqualify him from being Fire Lord. Is that seriously a requirement? So if Zuko was born without bending, he would have been an illegitimate heir? That doesn't seem very fair to me. I mean, firebending is cool, but it has literally nothing to do with, governing a country. So it kind of seems like the Fire Nation is basically just well, we're okay with having a bunch of sociopaths running our country because it's a monarchy, what are you gonna do? But they better be able to shoot lightning out of their hands, or so help me God. And I know the title is called the Fire Lord, but still, it's a pretty ridiculous bias. I mean, all bias is ridiculous, but you know what I mean. Then, on the other hand, the Fire Nation eradicated all of the airbenders and tried to capture and kill every water and earthbender they could. So bender ancestry isn't exactly pillared in privilege. So basically, what I'm saying is the conflict between benders and non-benders is complicated, which is why the original premise of The Legend of Korra is so good. But at the end of season 1, everything just gets fixed. And then we move on to the next big bad, and so on, with no lasting consequences. The concept that in each season the protagonist will take on a different warped idealism is fun, until you think about it for 5 seconds, and then it's kind of ridiculous. Amon's death scene is actually the only scene that's as good as the original. But the idea that all of the Equalists would just be like, oh, well, Bad Man actually tricked us, so he was bad, so everything he said was invalid and I have no complaints now, is so frustrating to me. I kinda thought Amon wore a mask because it dehumanized him, and this was a societal problem, not the problem of the individual. But nope, just bad guy is bad. And once he's gone, there are no more problems anymore. I mean, there were a lot of Equalists, but they all just realized they were being bad and knocked it off. You can't present us with a complicated problem and then give us a simplistic and uncomplicated solution. And this is basically what's wrong with every season of Korra. Amon wasn't the only good villain. Zahir made some points too. If the show had just focused on one of these warped idealisms, it would have been so much better. Like, there's so much they could have done with an overarching communism storyline. They could have followed Chinese or maybe even Russian history. I mean, I'm not a history expert, but I feel like there's a lot of material to work with there. Or they could have at least done a better job at linking these political philosophies together. Like in Season 2 of Avatar, the gang deals with the distorted policing and censorship of Ba Sing Se. But it doesn't feel like a side quest, because this political system is directly related to the 100-Year War. T-Loc just doesn't have the same level of cohesion or structure. It's honestly just a disjointed mess. Number 2, it's not funny. And okay, you may be saying, is the absence of humor really a fundamental flaw? Well, yes. Yes, it is. Okay, I'm not gonna lie. Not every joke on Avatar is amazing. There are some pretty dumb ones. But as the show went on, more often than not, the jokes would be intertwined with the context of the plot. Let's take the episode The Desert, for example. In this episode, Sokka drinks from a hallucinogenic cactus and, well, gets high. But while this is funny, it's also an important contribution to the storyline. In this episode, Appa is gone and everyone is trapped in the desert. Aang is distraught and impossible to reason with. Toph can't really see or move around easily because the ground isn't solid. And Sokka is tripping balls. Meanwhile, Katara is just trying to keep everyone together, and honestly, they probably would have died if it wasn't for her.
What's anyone else doing? What are you doing?
Trying to keep everyone together.
This is actually one of the darker, more emotional episodes, so Sokka's comic relief was really needed. But it's both the tonal contrast and the relevancy to the plot that make this gag so funny. If there had been some filler episode where Sokka just got high cause LOL random, I don't think it would have been nearly as effective. And even the silliest of episodes have this comedic formula. Like in the episode Nightmares and Daydreams, a bunch of ridiculous stuff happens. But the actual premise of the episode is that Aang can't sleep because he's afraid that all of his friends are going to die and he's going to let down the entire world. And the Ember Island Players wasn't just a funny, clever way of doing a recap episode, but it also let us know where each character was at emotionally before the start of the finale. For the most part, the jokes serve a greater purpose than just being funny, which ironically makes them really funny. And then there's The Legend of Korra, where you have Milo airbending out of his butthole, I guess? This is the type of joke that could be inserted into any scene and it would have the same impact. Why is he making an airbending fart joke during an important fight scene? Why is he making an airbending fart joke during Korra's training? It doesn't matter where you put the gag because it doesn't have to do with anything. And many of the jokes feel like they could be cut out and inserted into different scenes like this with minimal adjustment. And some scenes feel like they're written around the joke, or just simply written so there can be a joke, because there has to be a joke. Korra is filled with immature and cringy gags which my disdain for is simply a matter of preference, but it is confusing because the show seems like it wants to be taken seriously. Basically, it feels like the comedy of T-Loc is simply just an afterthought. 3. This version of Team Avatar is not likable. I think the idea behind Korra's characterization was to make her the opposite of Aang. He's immature and naive about the way the world works, but can also be intuitive and empathetic and wholeheartedly believes in non-violent conflict resolution. Korra is confrontational and stubborn and often has trouble seeing other people's point of view. But here's the problem. When it comes to making a show, it's important that the protagonist is likable. They don't have to be the fan favorite, but they have to be someone that the audience can root for. So, for argument's sake, let's say that Avatar was successful at doing this. I personally think they were. I mean, I've never met an Avatar fan who was like, I freaking hate Aang so much. Every time I see him on screen, I just want to start hissing and growling like a feral animal. So, theoretically speaking, if you make a likable character, and then you try to make a character that's the opposite of them, they're going to be, unlikable. But to be fair, writing a main character who's relatable and a reliable narrator, who moves the story along, but is also interesting and compelling and deeply flawed is harder than it sounds. Even though I don't like Korra, I do think that she's a fleshed out, multidimensional character. However, I can't say the same thing about her friends. Bolin is the unfunny comic relief. He's Walmart Sokka. He's nice and he has storylines, but when it comes down to it, he doesn't really matter that much. Fun fact, this is also how I would describe myself. All of it. And then there's Asami, who doesn't have a personality, I'm sorry. She has a backstory and things that happen to her, but that's not the same as development. The more I think about it, the more she seems like the girl character on a show where every other member of the team is male. She's cool and pretty. It seems like she does her hair and makeup, but she's low maintenance and never takes up anyone's time working on her exterior. She just happens to look like that. And she doesn't have any glaring character flaws either. She doesn't seem to be spoiled despite her upbringing. It was like she was written to be the ideal girlfriend. Which is weird because during the show she's mostly just there to be other people's love interests and occasionally mention that she feels weird about her dad. Then we have Mako, the human garbage man. I don't have time to go through all of his receipts. There are a lot of them. Basically, he just has emotional affairs and he doesn't really let go of Korra or Asami in the first 2 seasons because he really wants to be the star of a harem anime. Like, really, really badly. And it actually backfired in, like, the funniest way. Like, 10 out of 10. And I don't think Mako really changed or learned any fundamental lessons about himself. He just stops having as many storylines, so he isn't being a visible asshole as much. Doesn't mean he still isn't an asshole, though. I find Mako to be very passively manipulative, especially when it comes to his relationship with Asami. For example, when him and Korra kiss, he doesn't tell Asami about it, and when she confronts him, he acts like she's being emotional.
I've noticed how you treat Korra, how you acted when she was missing. You have feelings for her, don't you?
What? No. She was taken by a crazy bloodbender. How did you expect me to act?
I like Korra, but you've been keeping the truth from me this whole time.
The truth? About what?
You're really gonna make me say it?
Yes, because I don't know what you're talking about.
The kiss, Mako. I know.
Well, Bolin told you, didn't he?
Don't blame your brother for what you did. Do you have feelings for Korra or not?
Look, things are crazy right now. Can we deal with our relationship problems later?
Saying something like, do we have to talk about our relationship? Things are crazy right now, isn't necessarily manipulative, but it is invalidating and kind of implies that Asami is being irrational, which is convenient considering that he's the one at fault. Personally, I consider this to be typical toxic male behavior. Not only this, but Mako low-key makes the implication that he's more interested in Asami because of her money.
What do you think of Korra in a girlfriend sort of way?
She's great. But I think it makes more sense for me to go for Asami.
I was talking about a girlfriend for me. Leave some ladies for the rest of us.
I know, it's what I thought you meant.
Well,
I don't know, Bo. It doesn't seem like a good idea for you to date Korra.
You just said she was great 2 seconds ago.
Not only in this scene is Mako trying to block Korra from dating other people, despite being in a relationship himself, but he says that it makes more sense to date Asami, which, like, what does that mean? Like, financial sense? That's kinda what it sounds like to me. But not only is Mako toxic, but he's a pretty generic character. He's just that male love interest who treats the heroine coldly, but she knows deep down he loves her. He just has trouble showing his emotions because of his childhood or whatever. You know, he's that guy. And I hate that guy. Like, Korra's the Avatar. She's the most powerful person in the world. And she's in the same league as just some guy who's only nice to her half of the time and doesn't even know if he likes her. And the other girl who's interested in him is some beautiful billionaire dream girl. Like, I hate male writers so much. They're always doing this. My original thesis was that Korra's friends weren't likable because they weren't written with the same amount of consideration that she was. While Korra is also unlikable because of an equal lack of consideration when it comes to other people's point of view. And while I still think that's true, there's something about Mako and Asami's character development that I can't let go of. The Legend of Korra seems like this feminist show. I mean, it's about a female avatar, but a love triangle storyline centered around a brooding, toxic male is not only a tired generic trope, but it also makes the initial concept of the show, this exterior of female heroism, feel fraudulent. Number 4. It kind of feels like a fanfic. You may have noticed a recurring theme in this video. Something I come back to again and again. Something that is essentially the show's core issue. And that is a level of thoughtlessness. The Legend of Korra feels like a really promising first draft. It has a lot of interesting aspects that I can appreciate conceptually. But when really considered, they just don't work, or they just aren't fleshed out enough. The show feels more like a good idea or a good AU than it does a professional piece of work. Let's take Republic City, for example. Obviously, I don't know what went on in the writer's room, but it kind of feels like someone was like, hey, wouldn't it be fun if the show was set in a really big city and it was like New York or something, and there would be like cars and gangsters and stuff? And for some reason, no one else was like, hey, that does sound fun. But if we westernize a universe based on Eastern cultures, wouldn't we be implying that westernization is progress? Or even that Western culture is inherently more advanced, considering the show's focus on industrialism? And like, I don't think the creators meant to do anything offensive, and I don't even know if it is offensive. But I don't think it was thought through. Intriguing concepts, or surface-level clever, always seem to be good enough when it comes to The Legend of Korra. However, the most fanficky aspect of the show is the writing of the original characters. It really does feel like I'm reading a fanfic from a casual writer who understands the characters' personalities and mannerisms in a very broad and basic way. Like, Aang is heroic. Sokka's still kinda goofy. Katara's nurturing, and Toph is tough.
My name's Tough, because it sounds like tough.
And we're constantly being reminded and told who they are with catchphrases and references to the past.
Follow me, Twinkle Toes.
Tough. I'm 40 years old. You think you can stop with the nicknames?
I hired a guy with a similar ability to kill the Avatar myself once.
And look, I'm conflicted because these scenes are kind of cute, but there's just something weirdly inorganic and almost kind of cringy about them. It's almost like the show's trying to convince us that it's really them. And characters shouldn't act like they're trying to prove that they're them. That just comes off as suspicious and weird. But what bothers me more than anything else I've talked about in this video is the way they handled the writing of adult Toph. As the show goes on, they try to humanize the adult version of the original characters by making them bad parents for some reason. And there's nothing wrong with giving these characters flaws, but Toph's children don't even think that she likes them. Which is kind of heartbreaking considering how dismissive Toph's parents were of her. And you're gonna tell me that the girl who ran away from home, not only because of her parents' well-intentioned ableism, but because she was being suffocated by the rules of the upper class, is now enforcing those same rules? You're gonna tell me that the girl who was the rebellious blind bandit, the girl who ran scams as the runaway, is a cop? You're telling me this person
Yeah, let's break some rules!
became the chief of police? It actually hurts my heart a little. And again, this feels like a case of not thinking things through. It's like someone was like, oh, well, Toph is good at fighting, and being on the police chief sounds cool and accomplished, so it's perfect. Also, I'm 15, so I don't understand the character on a deeper level or the social anarchy she represents. I just started writing fanfic, so I can only do surface level character deconstructions at the moment. So I can say that there are 4 reasons why The Legend of Korra doesn't measure up to Avatar, but in reality, there's only one. The Legend of Korra is a surface level, deep show, and therefore an utter contradiction. Caught in limbo between what it was meant to be and what it actually is. Okay, so I realized that The Legend of Korra is not a bad show. It actually broke a lot of boundaries and changed what cartoons could be. I mean, like, it did a lot of good things, but this video is getting really long. So just picture those things and then imagine that I said them. I'm Olivia, and this has been Cartoon Science.